So this is thyroxine, and this is really also triiodothyronine, which is T4 for thyroxine, and triiodothyronine is T3. So they're pretty much the same hormone, except triiodothyronine is just missing this one iodine. So this quick video here, I'm going to go over just the outlines of synthesis of T4 and T3, as well as the two receptor sites in the cell for T4 and T3. Okay, so thyroglobulin is a protein that makes up about 50% of the protein in the thyroid gland. Now this is called a prohormone, and it has a lot of tyrosine, which is a conditional amino acid. So thyroglobulin, again in the thyroid, it goes into the lysosome, which is an organelle in pretty much most cells, and it's kind of cut up through a process called proteolysis, and lysis means to break apart or to cut, with the help of hydrogen peroxide, which is H2O2, and this is where also the iodine is added for the T4 and T3. So this prohormone again goes into the lysosome, which is an organelle in the cell, and then after it goes through the breakdown process, it yields 5 or 6 T4 or T3 hormones. Now T4 and T3 are really made up of 2 tyrosine amino acids. So this right here is pretty much one entire tyrosine amino acid, and then this is the benzene ring from another tyrosine amino acid. Okay, so this all happens in the thyroid. Now when T4 and T3 exit the thyroid into the circulatory system through the blood, T4 and T3 are surrounded by the proteins prealbumin, albumin, and then thyroxine binding globulin. And it's this large complex that travels through the blood to other tissues in the body. So once it gets to a cell, another cell in the body, and once it enters into the cytosol, and the cytosol is just the general space inside the cell, it's met with a specific protein in the cytosol, and then the T4 and T3 can actually be stored in that cell with the help of this specific protein. So T4 and T3 have receptors both actually inside the nucleus and then inside the mitochondria. Generally speaking, T4 and T3's function in the body is to increase metabolism, but apparently T4 and T3 do not increase the metabolism in the brain. So we're talking about tissues outside the brain. So in the nucleus, one of the receptors for T4 and T3 happen with a chromosomally associated protein. Now chromosomes are made up of individual genes, and now chromosomes have a lot of proteins associated with them, primarily for regulation, and then you have several histones, which are large proteins that help the chromosome fold, and so it can fit in the nucleus. So these chromosomally associated proteins, again, are basically regulatory proteins that help turn the gene on and off. And when a gene's turned on, it increases the production of certain enzymes and proteins. So the receptor for T4 and T3 actually activates transcription factors for increasing the production of metabolic enzymes. So it raises metabolism when T4 and T3 bind to this receptor protein in the nucleus. It increases the metabolism. Now the other receptor for T4 and T3 happen also in the mitochondria. Now in my mitochondria part 1 video and my mitochondria part 2 video, I go into the anatomy and also the metabolism that happens in the mitochondria. So this is where most of the metabolism, where a large portion of the metabolism in the body happens in regards to breaking down sugars, fats, and proteins. So the mitochondria breaks down sugars, fats, and proteins to yield our energy, which is ATP. Now, the mitochondria exist in aerobic conditions. Most of the other parts of this cell in our body function anaerobically, but the mitochondria is one place in the cell that needs oxygen. And this is what's speculated here for these T4 and T3 receptors. It's speculated that they may regulate oxygen consumption. So, okay, so these receptors are found in the inner mitochondrial membrane. And now it's this inner mitochondrial membrane here I have in blue that is the location where most of the ATP is created from the breaking down of glucose. And this here is the outer mitochondrial membrane. But it's the inner mitochondrial membrane where the receptor for T4 and T3 are, and that again is where most of the ATP is generated in the cell. Okay, just to really crash through it again, thyroglobin, prohormone, a lot of tyrosine, goes to the lysosome, is broken down with hydrogen peroxide, that's where you add the iodine, and this is where we get our T4 and T3, the two thyroid hormones. We get about 5 or 6 per thyroglobulin. It exits into the bloodstream. It's surrounded by prealbumin, albumin, and thyroxine binding globulin. And then when it gets to our target cell, it has specific proteins in the cell that help store certain amounts of T4 and T3 in the cell. There's a receptor in the nucleus with an associated protein for to increase metabolic activity, and there's also a receptor in the inner membrane of the mitochondria that may increase oxygen consumption and is also likely critical for ATP generation.